Would you guys give a great welcome to David Pendergrass?
Thank you. Thank you, Brett. Thank you much. Good morning. I want to encourage you this morning that I know we're going to go a little fast and furious. I hope you have a handout in front of you. I hope you do. And if you do, let's look at the very beginning here. But I have a couple things I want to say before we get started. If someone comes up to you and asks you the question, why are you a Christian? What would you say? A lot of people will say, well, because I was raised in church, or my parents are Christian, or I'm American, or I'm white, or I'm this, or I'm that. Those are not good answers. What's even worse probably is, I don't know. Or what difference does it make? You remember in 1 Peter 3:15, he says to be prepared to give a reason, a defense, an apologia for the hope that is in you. So I want to think this morning very briefly, and very, very briefly, and the time we have together, to think about why it is you are a Christian. Why are you a Christian? Now, there's a great need to do that. Youth are abandoning the faith. 3 different independent studies demonstrate that 7 out of 10 youth leave the church once they graduate. 7 out of 10. And of those, 3 to 4 eventually come back if they have children, get married and have children. That's 3 to 4 youth that will never step foot again in a church. Youth are abandoning the faith. When you do polls and you say what religion are you, the non-religion is the fastest growing. Over a quarter of the U.S. population now call themselves part of the nuns. 25%. It's the second largest quote-unquote religious group that we have. There's an overwhelming amount of atheist material online. YouTube, books. It is not like it was 20 years ago, 30 years, 50, 100 years. It's not like that. Times have changed. Atheists and skeptics are at an all-time foment and vigor in their opposition to religion. In fact, many don't even like the word atheist, which means the belief that there's no God. They prefer the word anti-theist, against those who believe in God. A tremendous need for Christians today to be informed and to be able to articulate why it is that we are Christians. There is a tremendous need, and that's exactly what started the whole process of Tyler bringing me here, and many, many people through life have expressed the same need. Now, before I give reasons, before we go to the handout, let me say some very quick, brief remarks at the very beginning. Number one, this presentation is not for everybody. I'm well aware. I'm a pastor myself. I've been in church work for 18 years. I've been in church all my life. I'm well aware that a lot of people aren't in circles of people who are skeptics or atheists. All of your friends and family members might be devout Christians, and you don't have much exposure to this. That's okay. This presentation is not for everybody. So I'm sorry if it feels like a waste of your time, but hopefully it'll encourage you to some degree no matter what. But I'm trying to say right off the bat that it's not for everybody. And you might feel overwhelmed. We might be covering some material you've never heard before. Understand that. I encourage you. That's why the handout is given. That's why there's numerous books I've listed on the handout for further reading. I know it's going to be fast and furious, but it's not for everybody, okay? And I can't make you believe something. To prove something means to demonstrate the truth or existence of something by argument or evidence. To demonstrate it. Well, of course, we can attempt to prove Christianity is true, but no matter what we do, we can't make a person believe something. I just can't do that. You can't make me believe in pink elephants. You can torture me. You can try. I might tell you, oh yeah, I do, because I don't want to be tortured, but I don't believe in pink elephants, or pink evolents, whatever those are. I don't believe those either. Neither one of them. But I can't make a person believe something. And that depends on all kinds of stuff. That depends on whether the person's willing to be convinced. Some people are not. Depends on what type of evidence you're looking for. Whether or not you present enough evidence, and on and on. But we can't make a person believe something. So instead of trying to prove to you Christianity is true, which I can't do it because I don't know what it would take for you or anybody you might know, today I want to simply tell you why I know Christianity is true. These are the things I find compelling. These are things I find convincing. Third, I can know something without being certain. We usually, in American English, we'll use the word think. Like, I think the meeting's tomorrow. We're like 51 to 75% sure. I think it's going to be cold in the morning. That's I think. We can use the word I know when we're above that. No, I know it's going to be cold. We typically use the word certain if you're being very logically consistent. Certain means I'm 100% sure. Well, I'm not 100% sure I exist. I really do think it, and I know it, but I might be in a dream. I might be a brain in an alien ship somewhere. I mean, it's logically possible. I think that's silly, but I'm 99.99% sure that I exist. Well, what I'm saying is, you can know something without him. A lot of people, to give religious vocabulary, we kind of worship the idol of certainty sometimes. And if some people lose the faith and leave it because they don't feel 100% sure. And that's exactly why I've named my presentation, Christianity, Why I Know It's True. Because I have knowledge of it. I know it's true. I know that I'm married. I know that I exist. I know that I have children. I know that Disney World is God's favorite theme park. I know that He loves to eat at Cracker Barrel. I mean, God, I know certain things. I know Christianity is true. I'm not absolutely certain it's true, but I know it. I know it. And that's okay to know something without being absolutely certain. And last but not least, nothing I'm going to tell you this morning, nothing is a knockdown, drag-out argument. If this were a debate between me and an atheist or a skeptic on the other side, he or she would be intelligent and have something to say in response. At no time, if they were educated, would they sit there and go, I don't know what to do. I want to get baptized. It wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't happen. There's too much literature out there. They would have something to say in response. So I'm not going to present nothing this morning that will make a skeptic just cry and run off home, if they're an informed skeptic. What matters, like in a courtroom, is when we look at the evidence, what conclusion do we draw from the evidence? It's the same evidence. So the question is, what do you find compelling? What do you find convincing? That's it. Just like in a court of law, you've got typically a defense and a prosecuting attorney. They're looking at the same evidence. The question is, what do you find convincing? Not, what can we say that silences all the critics? That can't be our goal, because you're going to be sabotaged. It won't happen. So when you talk to a skeptic or an atheist, if you're looking for that knockdown, drag-out, if they're educated, they're going to say, well, you could say this, you could say that. So this morning, instead of, because the time is so limited, in my book that I wrote, I did give skeptic's response and my response and a skeptic response and my response. This morning, I'm going to leave out the skeptic's response and just tell you why I know it's true. Fair enough? All right, I hope so. Naturalism and scientism. Now you're looking at your handout thinking, when he's going to get to my handout? Okay, the very top. I'm going to say something briefly. I've left you a little bit of space in the handout if you want to take notes here and there. There are numerous people that believe that all that exists in reality is matter and energy. Matter or energy, and those are interchangeable in physics. These people are called naturalists. They believe in naturalism. All that exists, even your thoughts, are just synapses firing off energy. And they believe that every single effect is caused by something of matter and energy. Cause and effect, whatever it is matter and energy. We say, how did the person that died of natural causes? That means someone didn't do it. An agent didn't do it. A personal agent, but a thing, something in nature did it. Natural causes. So a naturalist believes that all causes are natural. All of them. The thoughts in your brain, your mind, are natural causes. There's no you that's having those thoughts, because there's no you. There is no soul. It's all natural. It's all matter and energy. And everything which occurs in reality, again, occurs in matter and energy. And moreover, there are people who believe in the scientific method, believe that the scientific method can answer every conceivable thing that happens in reality. Everything. And if science can't prove it, it can't demonstrate it, it's a nonsense question. And we call these people, the belief is nowadays scientism, the belief that science will eventually prove it all. It used to be called logical positivism in the 20s and 30s. It was abandoned almost 100 years ago. Many scientists you'll hear on TV, CNN, whatever, when they'll show up, and it's very common in popular culture to believe that scientists are the cream of the crop. Scientists will solve it all. If you don't know it now, just hold on. Science eventually is going to prove it. And what you do if you believe in scientism is, this is how it goes. A Christian might say, well, how do you explain X? They'll say it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. If they're committed to naturalism, they're going to say, whatever causes it, it's something composed of matter and energy. And if they believe in scientism, they're going to say, I'm fine with not knowing. Science will eventually figure it out. So when you give God as a causal explanation, you're being lazy or stupid. That's exactly what they say about us all the time, because you've just given up. And so I think of this, you and I are in a fish bowl, and we're talking to a naturalist fish. Hey, naturalist fish, what do you think? Do you think there's something outside the fish bowl? The naturalist fish says, of course not. So that all reality is composed in this fish bowl. We all know that. And everything we could know that exists in the natural fish bowl is going to be solved by a scientific method. It'll solve everything. The other fish, maybe that's you and me as a Christian, would go, every once in a while we got this blocks of stuff up there. Don't we call that food? And the natural food, yeah, we call that food. What do you think that food comes from? It just appears someday. What do you think the cause of that food is? The naturalist fish says, I don't know. But whatever it is, science is going to figure it out. That's scientism. And I'll say, why do you think that? Because we all know it's true. Well, what if it came from outside the fishbowl? The naturalist fish, again, who said, no, that's nonsense. There's no such thing outside the fishbowl. There's nothing. And what if we say to the naturalist fish, well, there's nothing in the fishbowl that would properly explain that. They're going to say, well, you're just giving up. You're lazy. You're stupid. Give it time. It might take 500 or 1,000 years. And maybe science can't figure it out. But if it can't, then it means it's a dumb question. That's what the average skeptic or atheist thinks about the world and about reality. The problem is there are numerous facts about reality that are not composed of matter and energy, and science can't demonstrate. There are numerous facts. Numerous facts. It's like asking, what is the mathematical formula for why I love sunsets? You can try your best. There's no mathematical formula that's going to figure that out for us. It's outside of what mathematics can explain. Now, there are certain things that I'm convinced science cannot demonstrate because they're outside of the bounds of science. Not science is bad. I love science. I wanted to be an astronaut all of my childhood before I was called to ministry. And I still love science very much. Science is a good thing. And it helps us examine what takes place in the fishbowl. I'm just convinced science doesn't answer questions to reality. It won't tell me why I like sunsets. It won't tell me where morality comes from and so forth. So there's several things like that. So here's what there's my intro, as it were. So when I say that, because of that, I'm not a naturalist in that sense. I don't think the universe is made of matter and energy. I think there are things that exist that are not made of matter and energy, like love and numbers and morality. And I don't think science solves everything. Well, because of that, when I think of Christianity, I think of the 3 layers of probability. You don't have to do it this way, but I do. So if someone asks me and they have more time than 30 seconds in an elevator, why do you believe in Christianity? Why do you think it's true? I'll say, well, I think of it in 3 categories. There's a whole host of things that make me think it's quite probable. Then there's a host of things where I get very probable. Then there's things I think make it virtually certain that Christianity is true. And so what I want to do is very briefly run through these with you if I can. So the first thing when it comes to being quite probable is the best explanation for these facts. I think God is the best explanation for numerous things. Listen here. Skeptics and atheists will give other explanations for it. They will give other explanations. That's fine. I don't find them compelling. Like in a court of law. I think God's the best explanation. I think He's the best explanation for it. For example, I think God's the best explanation for why anything exists at all. Think about that question. Why does anything exist? Why are we here at all? Why is there any universe whatsoever? Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there a fishbowl in the first place? I think God's the best explanation for that. I don't think things have to exist. There's no reason to think that. Why the universe, the multi-universe, had a beginning. One of the leading scientific theories now for the beginning of the universe is that there's a quantum fluctuation vacuum at the very beginning, and it creates or pops out universes, like foaming bubbles. Calls now. There are several reasons to think that, but nevertheless, the universe did have a beginning, and even then I'm going to say the multiverse, again, came from somewhere. It came from somewhere, and that's outside the fishbowl. I think God's the best explanation. I think He's the best explanation. I think God's the best explanation for why the universe has constants and quantities that are fine-tuned for life. Hugh Ross has calculated over 90 different constants, like the force of gravity, like the forces that work inside of an electron, and on it goes. If these exact figures and ratios weren't exact, stars would never have formed. It's not as if just human life wouldn't be here, but no conceivable carbon-based life would ever exist. And it has to be just right or we would not exist. I think God's the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life. I do think that. I think God's the best explanation for why there are laws of nature in the first place, like the law of gravity. There's no scientific explanation, I don't think there'll ever be one, for why we have them. See, scientists assume laws of nature. They're not argued. They're not demonstrated. They're assumed. We call this the law of uniformity. We assume when we look in a telescope that the speed of light is the same the farthest reaches of space as it is here. We assume that. We don't know it. We have to assume it. We have to assume there are laws of nature throughout the universe. And there's zero conceivable scientific explanation for that. I think God's the reason why that. I think God is exactly why there are laws of nature and why they're still here. I think God is why the universe is rational. This is one of the greatest mysteries scientists face. Even atheists will say this all the time. It makes no sense why we can continue to explain the universe using calculations that fit perfectly. Our mathematical formulas comport perfectly with reality. Why is that? Why does the universe seem so stinking rational? I think God's the best explanation for why it's rational. I think it is rational. I think God's the best explanation for why we have information in the cell, and DNA and RNA. I do not think rational information, DNA is coding, it's software code. As Bill Gates of Microsoft said, it's the most elaborate software code he's ever seen. It is coding to tell the cell how to build proteins. And it's information. If I look at any book, pull up a book or your bulletin here and say, look there, I can read it, and this tells me how to come to the fall retreat, gives me instructions on how to get dunked. That information always comes from a mind. And I do not believe rational comes from non-rational. I don't think no matter how much you blow the wind on a pile of leaves, it will never say how to build a house. Ever. Give it trillions of years, it's not going to happen. When I come across vocabulary, I know that's information. That's what DNA is. I think God is the best explanation for why there's information in the cell. I think God is certainly the best explanation for objective moral values. Objective morality means that morality is not subjective. What that means is, for example, it's not, I personally don't prefer torturing babies for fun, but that's just my opinion. That would be subjective. Instead, humans around the world would concur it's immoral and despicable to torture babies for fun. I don't care who you are. And if you don't concur with that last statement, there's something wrong with you. Right? The majority of people, that's why we have a word called sociopath. Sociopathy is a serious disorder where a person either doesn't feel remorse or doesn't seem to be attuned to the moral code that all other rational, normal people do. These people are very dangerous, and we lock them up as quickly as we can because sociopaths are very dangerous. There's a wide range of moral values and duties across cultures and across the history of recorded time, and these values are consistent. Now, over time, we seem to learn more, just like we do in mathematics. But there is no such thing as African mathematics. 2 + 2 doesn't equal horse in Spain. It always equals 4. Always has. But we learn more about mathematics as time goes on. We learn more about it. But it was always there. It was always there. Well, the same thing is true with morality. Always true. Now, many atheists do believe in objective moral values. And this is why so many atheists would never murder an innocent person, even though they're atheists. Of course, I would debate this point, because there's no reason at all, stay with me here, to ground morality in an atheistic worldview. Ground it. That is to say, it's objective. Morality and atheism is just social etiquette, a biological delusion to help us survive as a species. If we are merely evolved primates on a speck of dust in an infinite universe, what possible reason is there not to murder everyone who gets in the way of our survival? What conceivable reason is it? It happens all the time in the animal kingdom. This morning, lions are going to kill something. Right now, this morning, right now, there are animals being eaten by other animals. And nobody calls lions murderers. If that's all we are, or as evolved primates, there's no moral reason not to kill everybody who gets in our way. It was the precise argument that Hitler made, and all those who believe in eugenics did. And remember, morality is not what we do. Morality is what we ought to do. It's what we should do. In atheism, there's simply no real moral oughtness whatsoever. Only God best explains why morality feels like an ought. Command, because it's a command given by God. We feel like we ought to help our neighbor. We ought to do the right thing. It's a should feeling. Morality is not what we do. It's what we ought to do. And I think God's the best explanation for why we feel like we ought to do certain things and why it's objective and universal. Number 8, why consciousness exists. Consciousness does exist. I am conscious. My brain is not talking to the brain in that body. I am talking, and you are listening, and you're processing this. Consciousness absolutely exists apart from the brain. I'm convinced of it. Though, of course, we know that the brain can affect the way we think, but they're not the same thing. I can have a stroke, and I don't think as well as I used to. Sure, that's right. Just like if I have a faulty car, I can't drive like I used to. I'm limited by the but my soul and my mind, my rational mind, is limited by the capacity of my brain. Of course, in this world it is. They're related, but they're not the same. Consciousness, I think, is best explained because of God. Number 9, I think the soul exists. In fact, I'm convinced of it. I'm what you call a mind-body dualist. I think it's very true that the soul exists. And there are numerous reasons to think that. One of the reasons is, and I encourage you to read the book, God in the Afterlife. It's there in your handout. Jeffrey Long did a book that's really, really good, and he just wrote a sequel to it, God in the Afterlife. But Evidence of the Afterlife is great. And you ought to hear the stories of those people who have died and come back. You ought to hear them. They come back with knowledge they never knew. They meet dead relatives they know existed, and on and on. The best explanation for why they learn knowledge when they come back from being dead is that they kept existing. Well, if they are just mad, how did that keep existing when they're dead? I think the soul best explains that. And why we appreciate beauty. There's no survival mechanism for why I love a sunrise. I'm not more likely to survive anywhere by enjoying sunsets and waterfalls at all. So, those are reasons why I think it's very, very likely. It's quite probable. Now we're moving on to the very probable. Very probable. Now when we do that, let me do this real quickly because under this very probable category. Personally, whenever I think of something is true, I'm looking for 2 major criteria. External criteria or data and internal data or internal criteria. For example, if something occurred in history, number 1, is there enough sufficient external evidence like manuscripts, archaeological evidence? Think about that. 2, is there sufficient internal evidence? That is, do the events comport to what we know about the time period, events, places, and people? Do they know what we know of reality? Those are the 2 areas I look at. And for example, when we take that exact same thing of external and internal, I apply that to any religion. Because twice in my faith, I basically left the faith. And I did a real hard search of different world religions. And I applied the same criteria to all the religions I could find. And I found that they were wanting. I didn't find them compelling. For example, in Mormonism, they believe very much that there were witnesses to the golden tablets. And they apparently went to their deathbed saying, I know I saw it. Between 8 to 10, 11 of them. Well, they claim to be witnesses. Well, we Christians think they were eyewitnesses to the resurrection. Well, now what do we do about that? But when you compare, that's the internal data. When you look at that and you compare that with other things going on in Mormonism, things fall apart. For example, something called Reformed Egyptian is supposedly where the golden tablets were written in a language called Reformed Egyptian. There is 0 evidence of Reformed Egyptian in the world. There's nothing that corroborates it. If you look inside this story, Joseph Smith tells a story in the Book of Mormon of this tribe of Nephi. There's no evidence for them, no evidence their geographical locations. Details in the stories like the existence of horses, chickens, elephants, chariots in North America. There's 0 archaeological evidence for them. None. There's no corroboration. Well, that's bothersome for me. Because just to say someone is a witness and then you read the story and go, it's not corroborated by anybody, anywhere, well, that's bothersome. That means that I think he made it up. This is what one of the leading American archaeologists of the 20th century says about Mormonism. Dr. Michael Coe, he says, "Let me state uncategorically that as far as I know, there's not one professionally trained archaeologist who is not a Mormon who sees any scientific justification for believing that the Book of Mormon's statements concerning archaeology to be true." And I would like to state that there are quite a few Mormon archaeologists who join this group. This is in spite of a host of well-intentioned books and articles by Mormon intellectuals trying to justify these claims. Well, that bothers me, and that's why I'm not a Mormon. I need some corroborating evidence. And I want to apply the exact same thing, external evidence and internal data and so forth, to the New Testament. I find a very different picture. So I'm trying to demonstrate to you that I've been as consistent as I can be, because I want to believe in something that's true. I don't want to be duped, and I don't want to believe in something nonsense. And if Christianity is just a fairy tale, I don't want to believe in it. But in my studies, I've come to conclude in my 3 degrees, it's not a fairy tale and it's not nonsense. When I apply the exact same criteria, I find all kinds of things. We have to go pretty quickly on this, so stay with me. When we look at the external data, for example, the New Testament, I'm going to focus on the New Testament because we're talking about Christianity. I'm just going to zoom in on that and spare time and not talk about the Old Testament much at all. The New Testament was written originally in what we call manuscripts, which literally means handwritten. They were papyrus sheets. Papyrus plant are long plants that you rip down and you shred it. You're shucking corn. They do that a lot in Kansas. And when you strip it off, you can get it real wet, and you do it crisscross. And there's a natural kind of glue that's inside the plant. You put it in between rocks, smash it hard, and it dries in the Egyptian sun. And you get the early form of kind of like a paper, but it's not paper. That's where we get the word for paper, though. But the papyrus plant. So if you can see on this picture here, can you see the grains that go left to right, horizontal, if you can see that well? And anyway, that's the manuscripts that we have of the New Testament come from very, very ancient sources. So the original New Testament was written on this, probably in a book scroll form. And the problem is we don't have any of the originals. We have none of the originals of the New Testament. So what Paul wrote or what the original Gospels wrote, we don't have the originals. Instead, what we have are copies and copies of the originals. This is P52. It's about the size of a credit card, and it has portions of John on it. It's the oldest known fragment in the world. There's probably something that just came that's going to come out soon that's actually earlier. This dates from around 120 AD, give or take 25 years. And this is a picture of it. But I don't have time, but this is very, very telling. This is not on a scroll. This is on a codex form. A codex is the technical word for a book. I don't have a book up here, but you know what a book is. So a book is where you get the pages and you sew it along the side or glue it. And eventually they started sewing it. Well, the Christians might have invented the book as we know it. If they didn't invent it, they made it very, very popular. So the earliest manuscripts that we have actually come from sheets from a book, and they collected all those together to form an early New Testament, or traveling Bible, you might say. And here's an example of it. Well, we know the manuscripts we have are very ancient. They come very close to the original. Just very briefly, here's an example of ancient documents. This has been updated. A lot of the Christian apologists get this wrong, but for example, look at the top. It says Homer. Homer's Iliad was written about 800 BC. The earliest manuscripts we have come from 400 BC. That's a time gap of 400 years. There are about 1,757 manuscripts of that. Herodotus, look down can you see where time gap? That's the gap. So 1,350 years between the copies we have from when it was originally written. 1,350 years gap. You have 102 years of Sophocles. You've got 1,300 years for the earliest for Plato. And down the list it goes. All the way down to the New Testament, we have fragments that date within a few decades. It's nothing like this in the Western Hemisphere. Now, on top of that, we have over 5,700 manuscripts. There's nothing in the Western Hemisphere of the planet Earth that has more copies handwritten of a document. Nothing comes close to the inch. This is all of them. Some have, 96 documents of Thucydides. Nothing comes close. And they come within a very short period of time. I love how Bruce Metzger says this. No classical scholar would listen to an argument that the authenticity of Herodotus or Thucydides is in doubt, because the earliest manuscripts of their works, which are of any use to us, are over 1,300 years later than the originals. Meaning, if you're going to dismiss the New Testament, you've got to kick out all of history. Does that make sense to you? If you're going to say, well, wait a second, we can't trust the New Testament because it comes within 100 years, 100 years of copying, maybe they got it all wrong. If that's your argument, you've got to kick out almost every other literature written in the Western world. because ours is far better. And most come from later on in the centuries. The circle is where we want to spend more energy. That's in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries. That comes very, very early. And there's a lot of evidence there for that, but I don't have much time now to talk about that. But most of them come later on in the medieval times. That's the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, when monks were in scriptoriums writing it. But the earliest come to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries. Manuscripts not only are early, they come from different regions of the empire with different families, and they take us back to the 2nd century. If I went to the preschool or nursery here, children's ministry, if that's not already started, and I didn't know who the parents were, and I grabbed the kids out and I said, all right, let me start grouping you together. I might look at certain characteristics, like my kids, beautiful, great kids, son and daughter. I said, well, you've got reddish hair. I bet you go with that guy. And I bet it's the preacher's kid. You would, and here the same thing. You might be putting them together. If the boy had a long beard, you think they'd go with Tyler. I mean, you could see how they fit. And you would categorize them and put them into families. And you go, I bet you're related. I bet you come from a common ancestor called mom and dad, and I probably look like XYZ. We do that with manuscripts. They have similarities once we discover them in a monastery or in a cave. We start putting the characteristics together like children and go, I bet they're related. Well, that's really important because we have 3 or 4 major families of manuscripts. But we know they're related to an earlier ancestor, which we don't have. But that earlier manuscript goes back to the 2nd century. That's their mid-hundreds. That's a big deal because the New Testament was all completed by then. So it goes way, way, way back to early, and that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Now, I want to say one quick thing about that. This is really important because, listen here, it demonstrates that there is no attempt to suppress or control the documents of the New Testament. There's no pope. There's no Roman Catholic Church. I don't care what the new movie comes out or what you're going to hear at Eastern time on CNN and how there are secret lost books the church doesn't want you to read and it makes the bestseller list. That's all nonsense. In scholarship, we study all those books. There was nothing suppressed. There was no power. By the 2nd century, the Christians were a fledgling group in trouble from the Roman government. There was no wonderful leadership that's making sure that all the Christians they're just local autonomous groups doing the best they can. So there is no conspiracy theory. Those are all nonsense. And it's not the telephone game. Well, David, the manuscripts just passed on forever. Nope. It's not like that. You know the telephone game, right? You tell a person, it goes around a long crowd. By the time it ends up, I like apples, ends up with who likes horses. I mean, it's just it's funny. And it's to be funny. That's not how manuscripts worked. Manuscripts were written. There's multiple lines of transmission. And they had access to the earliest copies. One scholar says that most manuscripts lasted around 200 years. Papyrus could be very brittle. If you took care of it, it's good. But it could wear out over time. But it could last almost to 200 years on average. A guy named Tertullian, who wrote in the 2nd century, he makes a comment and says that you can go to the major churches and find he called the authentic or original documents. That's in the 2nd century. Now, unless he's lying, that means the master copies existed all the way to the 2nd century. That means we have copies of these manuscripts that come in the living lifetime of the original manuscripts. That's a big deal. There's nothing like that in the Western world. Nothing comes close to that. Not at all. Earliest fragments that we continue to find corroborate it. For example, we have some documents. One's called Codex Sinaiticus, one's called Codex Vaticanus. Codex means of the book form. And these 2 documents come from about the mid-300s, mid-4th century. They are exquisite. Well, what happens over time is like Indiana Jones, scholars continue to find fragments of manuscripts. They keep finding them. I don't know if you know that. They do keep finding them. And when they find these earlier fragments, and they are just fragmentary, that's a shame, because they've been destroyed, or they were, like this next one is called the Oxyrhynchus. Oxyrhynchus papyrus on the right side was literally in a trash dump. They found thousands of documents in a trash dump in Egypt. And most of these documents aren't about the Bible. Some that were about the Bible. So on the left side, you have Codex Vaticanus, and look how incredible it looks. I mean, this thing, that cost a lot of money to write documents back then. So that was very expensive and very well done. On the right side, we had a fragment that was found not too long ago, and it's earlier than the document on the left. Well, when you took that fragment and compare it, there's very little difference. There's some difference in word order, sometimes verb tenses or spelling errors. But no manuscript that we find disconfirms. We don't find fragments that say Jesus was a woman. There were 32 disciples. He lived in Vegas. There's nothing comes remotely close to that. So when Indiana Jones types, and they're all out there, when they continue to find them, one guy named Daniel Wallace, when these people find manuscripts in monasteries and libraries and trash dumps around the world, it corroborates what we already knew. The earlier we get, the more it confirms what we already knew. That's a good deal. That's a good deal. There are no major, what we call lacunae. Can you say the word lacunae? Yes, you can. That's a gap. The ending of Mark might be one. What's a lacunae? What's a gap? Well, this is a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls that was found in the 50s. And you see those big holes at the bottom, right? Well, those holes mean we have no idea what goes there unless you find other manuscripts that fill in the gap. Well, unfortunately, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, we don't know what the gap said. And so when you translate it, they're just big gaps or lacunae, and it looks like this when you translate it. So on the left side is the actual Hebrew text transliterated. On the right side, it's maybe a little too blurry, it's too little. On the right side is the English translation. But can you notice at the bottom right where it has the brackets, and it says ... 10, 11, 12, 13, you see that dot? The brackets mean we don't have a clue what went there. Now why is that? Because there are holes. And so when you do an English translation, you put ... And at the top it's the same as ... Now scholars who study Hebrew all the time might guess at what was in it. We call that an emendation. We guess, but they put it in brackets. But we don't know. Well, there's nothing like this in the New Testament. Think about that. Almost all of the manuscripts we have in the ancient world, we have big gaps. We just don't know. What if Jesus said to the woman at the well, I tell you, ... Like, what did he say? It doesn't exist. We have so many manuscripts, there are no major gaps. And the one conceivable, possible exception is the ending of Mark, and that's a big debated issue. And most scholars think it's not a gap, but it's possible. That's a big deal. There are differences in the manuscripts. We call them variants. And less than 1%, about 99% of them are worthless. There's spelling errors in the manuscripts, or word order changes. There's all kinds of common things. If you go yourself, if you want just for fun to knock yourself for sleep today, try to copy the Gospel of Mark by hand. And then have your spouse or a friend check it and see how well you do. Well, you're going to make mistakes. We do. You don't mean to. Not because you don't love Jesus or you're a sinner. You just made a mistake. Well, that's what we do, but you could spot it very quickly. If you reread and go, how many ways can you spell the word there? Or our, or are, or whatever, especially if you heard it. Well, that's a homonym, I misspelled that one. But you could quickly spot the spelling errors. If you said a apple instead of an apple, that's called a variant. You can spot them very quickly, and almost all of them that exist in the manuscripts are worthless changes. They just fix them. The copy just made an error. They don't have spell check. There's no Microsoft Word back then. But less than 1% are meaningful. They do change a little bit, but none of them change major doctrine. If we had time for fun, Mark 16:9 and following. If you read your Bibles, you look at the end of Mark 16:9 and following, you'll have a footnote or an asterisk that usually says, other ancient manuscripts do not contain verses 9 through whatever. Scribes added that later on, almost certainly. John 7:53 through 8:11. I'm really going to make you leave the faith this morning. That's the woman caught in adultery, and Jesus says, who has no sin, cast the first stone. He draws in the dirt. No ancient manuscript has that. That doesn't show up to the 4th or 5th century. So most scholars don't think that was original in John. In fact, some manuscripts have that exact story in Luke. Mark 1:1, you'll say, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is not in some manuscripts. Well, none of these things make sure Jesus doesn't exist or there's a major doctrine that's changed. There's only a handful of these. Now, you're going to hear about a guy named Bart Ehrman. He's going to show up on CNN. He'll show up on all the big TV shows and tell you that there are more variants than there are words in the New Testament. There's no reason to trust it. I disagree with him, and every other textual critic I know disagrees that no one would say that. What about the internal criteria? We're about out of time, I know. They gave me a little permission to go over just a little bit. Let me go quickly on these. And the internal criteria, that is, when we look at the stories, what do we find out? Well, the Gospels are an ancient form of biography. Let me say a few quick things about this. Number one, every specialist in the field knows that Jesus existed. So Jesus mythicists, those who say Jesus is just a myth, he never existed, I'm just trying to help you here, sister and brother. Don't waste your time. Don't watch the YouTube video. Don't buy the book. It's nonsense. No New Testament scholar in the world thinks Jesus is just a myth. Everyone knows he really existed. And there's a lot of reasons to think that. There are a lot of reasons. We don't have time now. And Gospels can't be an ancient novel, because novels back then were typically romances. They loved romances in the Greco-Roman time. Novels typically relied very little on historical works. Well, the Gospels do rely on historical works. It can't be an historical novel, because those were very rare, and typically the people written were not in the recent past like Jesus' was. And the Gospels have an enormous amount of historical anchors. So almost every New Testament scholar in the world thinks the Gospels are an ancient biography. And a biography is a kind of history. It's a kind of history. It's not like the Lord of the Rings. It's not like Harry Potter. A gospel is a kind of history where it emphasizes the main character. The Gospels record characters who are corroborated all in the New Testament. We can know for a fact these people existed from archaeological evidence and other literary evidence. We know for a fact these people exist. And there are more, but these are just the prominent ones. We can corroborate. We know for a fact these people existed. These aren't myths. The Gospel record locations that are corroborated. There's a guy named Josephus. He was a Jewish author. He was from Palestine. Imagine being from middle Florida, from Eustis and Orlando, and you know the town. You grew up there. When Josephus writes about the towns and villages and cities, and the Gospels write about towns and villages and cities, the Gospels do better than Josephus. That was his hometown. That doesn't mean he's lying or mistaken. It means we can't corroborate it. We don't have other evidence. 81% of the Gospels are corroborated. And the only ones that are not are almost certainly were tiny, tiny villages. When you read other later Gospels called the Apocryphal Acts or Apocryphal Gospels, they're worthless. I mean, they are worthless. They'll talk about their location is the world. Or they'll say Jesus, one was, what is it? He sailed to his city of Nazareth. You don't sail to Nazareth if you don't know if the Gospel. I mean, it's nonsense. The Gospels are amazingly accurate with their locations. The names and the frequency of names are incredibly important. Richard Bauckham and Peter J. Williams has done, I forgot to say, the location Simon Gathercall is written a lot on and talked about Simon Gathercall on the locations. On the names, Richard Bauckham and Peter Williams demonstrate. Now think about that. If I asked you, I took a poll in here in this church and I said, give me the top 10 men and male and female names right now in the country. Oh, forget that. Let's say Florida. Give me the top 10 names. How well do you think you do if I put that against the real serious data? In order. Now let's change it. Now do it for 40 years ago. 50 years ago. How well do you think you do? I might say Bob, Sarah. I mean, I might get on the list somewhere. I would have no clue what the frequency is. When you compare the names and frequency of names in the Gospels, they match amazing with what we know of the ancient world. The top two names in the ancient world are Simon and Joseph. Outside of in the New Testament, they show up 15.6% of the time in literature or funeral inscriptions. The Gospels get it 18.2%. They show up there. Outside the New Testament, 9 names show up 41%. The Gospels and Acts is 40%. You see that? The top 2 women's names, Mary and Salome, outside the New Testament appear 28.6%, and the Gospels is 38%. The top 9 women's names show up almost 50%. The Gospel and Acts is 61%. What is the likelihood that you make up a story and you get the frequencies of the names to match almost perfectly that's corroborated from ancient sources? It's highly unlikely they made it up and were that stinking lucky to get that close to the frequency. Gospels are not Pauline. That is, they weren't just forced to be from their particular tradition. So the Gospels aren't like Paul's letters in the same way. They're not Gentile. They're not about circumcision. So they seem more authentic to be in the Galilean area. They fit the Jewish theological landscape of the first century perfectly. From what we know, it's not about transformers. It's not about kinds of crazy things. It fits perfectly what we know. And last, of course, of these is the resurrection. The resurrection is, I think, absolutely the best reason. It explains why numerous things. Why the primitive Jews began worshiping Jesus. Jews only worshiped what they thought was divine or deity. Why did Jews do it? Why did Jews do it? I think the best explanation is the resurrection. They began praying, baptizing, preaching, healing in Jesus' name. That means in his character and his authority. Why would they do it for someone who had been crucified as a criminal? Groups of priests, Pharisees, and even Saul Paul radically changed sides. They were always Jews, but I think the best explanation is the resurrection. And of course, they maintained their faith in the midst of ostracization, persecution, and for some of them, death to the bitter end. I think the resurrection is the best explanation for why they would do such a thing. And the resurrection did not occur. Christianity is false. It's bare bones ground zero. If the resurrection did not happen, Paul said, it's just nonsense. And we're to be pitied. Well, I don't think it's nonsense. I think it best explains the data. And the overall narrative of the Gospels is plausible. It is plausible. The differences in the detail are to be expected, and we can't prove everything about the Gospels. We can't prove it. We just can't. I love how these two scholars say it this way. James Dunn, who's a world-class New Testament scholar, says, "Whoever looks for chronological accounts, detailed conciseness in every episode recorded, pedantic precision in reproducing Jesus' teaching as given word for word, and such like, will be disappointed. But not because of anything scholars have said or done, rather because the evangelists themselves were not concerned with such matters. The fault here, if fault there be, lies not in the scholars or in their findings, but in the false expectations with which so many have come to the Gospels." Or Ben Witherington, who's a great scholar, says, "The historical critical method, with all its limitations and capabilities, is used by the vast majority of New Testament scholars, including evangelicals. It must be stressed that this method is incapable of producing absolutely certain results. The most one can reasonably expect is that it may demonstrate that there is a good probability that something did or did not happen. When the method is unable to accomplish even this, it does not necessarily mean the events under scrutiny are of doubtful historicity. The evidence may be too scant or complex to come to a proper conclusion. So I don't feel any compulsion to prove every detail of everything that occurs. I think the vast majority of the narrative is absolutely trustworthy at minimum. At minimum. And the thing that really nails it, and I'm done, but I don't start here. I end here when I talk to people, when I share the gospel. It is virtually certain that Christianity is true is because I've had religious experiences that prove it. I have been saved. I've not met the resurrected Jesus yet, but I've met his presence. I've met the Spirit. He's changed my life. I know he's real. We talked this morning, in fact. We talked a good while even this morning. He's alive and well. He's just fine. And my religious experience corroborates, it fits and comports what I know to be true of everything I've just covered in this presentation. I know for a fact that he has saved me. I could tell you story after story of answered prayer. I could tell you story, and there's no conceivable scientific explanation for the things that I've seen with my own eyes and know in my gut. I know it. This is not just a cerebral exercise for me. I think there are reasons that point me, quite probable, very probable, and almost completely, we say in the South, daggum certain, that this is true. And I'm telling you, for me, it's religious experience. That's how I know it. I know. I also know countless other people who've had religious experiences. That's how I'm almost virtually certain because of my religious experience. When I almost left my faith, the only things that bothered me the most, why I didn't completely abandon the faith, were those religious experiences. They were always in the back of my mind going, yeah, but remember that time, God? I couldn't shake them. And I'm glad he didn't let me. Now, we are here. We are here. If you've not completely given up your faith or thought this was a waste, I'm trying to encourage you, beneath the surface is in the literature that I suggested to you. Underneath the iceberg of this presentation is an enormous amount of literature, YouTube videos that are free, that I strongly encourage you to go read at your own leisure and pace. Some of you say, David, no thank you. I'm just not in the world of having ever to debate with anybody or give a reason for the hope that's in me. Maybe that is you, but I'm going to end where I started. Why are you a Christian? Are you able to give even a 60-second answer for why you are a Christian? That is the challenge before us. Dear friends, dear disciples of Jesus, He is alive and well. And people who have good questions deserve to have some kind of good answer. Amen? Amen.